Welcome to the Cables to Clouds podcast. Cloud adoption is on the rise, and many network infrastructure professionals are being asked to adopt a hybrid approach. As individuals who have already started this journey, we would like to empower those professionals with the tools and the knowledge to bridge the gap.
All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Cables to Clouds podcast. I'm your host this week, Tim, and with me, as always, are my two lovely co-hosts, Chris Miles and Alex Perkins. Alex, how you doing over there in the western part of North Carolina this week?
I feel pretty lucky. It seems like that weather that everybody's getting on the East Coast was for like 2 hours here, and then it just completely went away. And my kids are at the pool, the sun's out, so wow. I'm feeling pretty lucky. We thought school started at the end of August, and apparently we were 2 weeks off, so been scrambling a bit. Yeah, I didn't realize school started so early. I don't know why I'm so used to, it's like late August is usually when I thought it starts, but I got less than a week and I can't wait.
Oh man. Yeah, it's funny because I'm on the east side of North Carolina, and my kids don't start back until the end of August, like the last week of August. So it's funny.
Yeah, I thought it was
different.
Like the 28th, I think is the last Monday, but it's 14th. So I don't know. 2 weeks earlier than we were expecting, but.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when I lived in Idaho, it was all messed up. Like we would start like super early, but there was a lot of expectation of like snow days and stuff, and they still at that time gave extra time for kids to help their parents with like farming and stuff. So like there was harvest time that was figured into the whole thing.
I also I went to high school in Idaho, so yes, I remember. Yep.
All right, Chris, what's going on in the land down under?
Hey man, not much. Certainly not harvest time here right now. It's a beautiful, I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday morning for me. It's quite early. Still disoriented, still downing this first cup of coffee, but yeah, man, things are good. We're heading into spring here, so it's starting to look a little bit better outside, and you can't tell right now. It's very dark because it's so early, but yeah, we're getting over this Sydney winter, as I say with air quotes, because it's probably the most lighthearted winter I've ever experienced in my life. People here are very spoiled. They think it's freezing when it's like for the Fahrenheit folk out there, it's like when it's like 55 degrees, people are like, "Oh, it's so cold." And it's like, dude, this is nothing. So
55, yeah.
I need a light jacket.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, so I've been wearing shorts most of the winter, which is very nice.
I bet people are giving you strange looks, like who is this mad lad?
Nah, dude. So many people here, like this is like half the people here are not half the people, but there's a very large Samoan population here, and I feel like every Samoan person that I've met in the United States would be one of those people that wore shorts like year round. So that's still very common here to have a lot of people still wearing shorts when it's cold.
Gotcha. As for myself, I am just getting all my stuff together. We worried about the East Coast weather as well, because we're gonna be flying soon. So yeah, but it looks like tomorrow will be good. So I guess we'll see. Then we'll when I get back, I'm sure I have lots of fun stories to tell.
So you're hitting the road tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
How long's the flight?
It's 5 hours to the West Coast, but we're actually staying over at the West Coast, so that makes sure that we don't miss the one to Japan. So we're actually gonna sleep there in LA and then go back to the airport early and get on the flight to Japan. It's 11 and a half hours, so we'll see.
Nice.
Hopefully it'll be a good time, man. Hopefully it'll all work out. So we'll see. By the time this one airs, I'll probably be back. But yeah. Anyway, so the reason that it is so early for Chris, and thanks to Chris for getting up and everything, is that we actually have our first guest from the European part of the globe. So we'd like to welcome Karl Cooke. He is an Azure Solutions Architect with Avanade, right? I said that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. He's also an Azure MVP. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about the Azure MVP program as well. And honestly, just we wanted to get more Azure content in here because we know we've spent a lot of time on the AWS stuff, and we want to give all the clouds a lot of love. So it was really great for Karl to agree to join us here. So how you doing, Karl?
Pretty good, Tim. Thanks for getting up so early for me, Chris. That's great.
No worries. It's something I should be doing on a regular basis anyway, and I don't do it. So this is a good excuse.
Yeah, I often say, yep, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. to study, and I think the last time it happened was maybe about 1.5 years ago. So,
Yep, sounds about right.
Yeah, same here.
But it's awesome to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Karl, you actually you're on a podcast yourself, right?
Sure. So yeah, this week Thursday will be our 10th episode. So we're really, really pretty new, still finding our feet. So we run myself and a couple of former colleagues run a video cast live stream called Cloud Native Weekly. So we're all Azure MVPs, but we recognize that Cloud Native isn't single cloud. Cloud Native is multi-cloud, even like we were talking about before, like hybrid and on premises. So we wanted to start a podcast that sort of talked about what we've been doing, what we've been hands-on with the last week, and then talking about specific techs in the Cloud Native ecosystem, so Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So that's what we're doing. So bite-sized sort of show, 30-35 minutes each week, just covering off what we've been up to and what the latest sort of trends and news are. So it's pretty cool, and it keeps us all in sort of contact with what's happening in the Cloud Native world, because it moves like everything in the cloud and tech in general. It moves so fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah. Is that mainly Azure focused, or you're saying you do everything?
No, so I mean, we do a lot of Azure focused stuff, being Azure MVPs in other user groups and talks and stuff like that. But the purpose of that podcast with the Cloud Native Weekly is specifically to be cloud agnostic. Yes, we talk about, if there's news for AWS, if there's news for Google Cloud in the Cloud Native space, we'll share it and we'll talk about it. And likewise, if there's stuff for Azure or just general sort of cloud native news, we'll look to talk about it. Our specific goal is to be cloud agnostic, because, like I said, cloud native tech, Kubernetes and related technologies, it doesn't really matter where you're running it. Obviously, if you're running it outside of a cloud provider or a hyperscaler and you're not using the managed Kubernetes stuff, then the level of difficulty goes up a little bit. But I mean, it's still cloud native tech, and it's still worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. So what I tend to see actually is for guys, for people that get into cloud that are coming from either from something else or even just in general, they kind of go, they pick the cloud, whatever cloud that's going to be, that they tend to really excel at, and then they depending on what they're doing, they tend to branch out, add the other clouds to some degree. Yeah. And do you think that it's easier or harder to, like, once you've added, once for me it's like AWS, right? For you it's Azure. Once you the cloud of choice really well, do you think it's easier or harder to actually branch out?
Well, I think so. It depends what cloud you're moving from and to, I suppose. But I think once you've learned the way of working in the cloud, it's not so much about which cloud, but you're trying to automate everything. You're trying to adapt as much DevOps culture and principles and tooling as possible. It generally doesn't matter what cloud you're coming from and going to, as long as you learn the differences in what they call things, and each cloud and each tech has its own idiosyncrasies, right? So I think that once you know one cloud really well, the on-ramp to learn another is it's a lot less steep. For me, coming to learn AWS, it's about learning what the tech is called. It's about learning what cool, funky names AWS has given things. You know,
Yeah.
for me, it makes sense what in my head. It makes sense what things are called in Azure. So then I have to then translate that into the AWS world if I'm working with AWS. But I mean, if that's all you have to do and the tech is similar, and it's not always going to be the same, but if the tech is similar, then that on-ramp is next to nothing, right?
I think that was like the hardest thing for me. I know when I took the certified cloud practitioner and then the solutions architect associate for AWS, I mean, going from knowing nothing to just trying to cram in everything and every little different,
all the
like,
services,
server type. Yeah. And like serverless versions, and then like Kinesis. How many different versions of Kinesis stuff is there? Like there's so many different naming conventions and things that you got to memorize. So I get it.
Yeah, but I do like what you said there. Is like once you get familiar with how to work in the cloud and how to move across the landscape and things like that, it's the multi-cloud thing just kind of like takes hold after that, right? You kind of learn the new way of operating. And a lot of people are always like, which cloud should I learn? What's the best one to learn, first if I'm first getting into it? And I'm really just like, it doesn't really matter, man. Just pick one. As long as you pick one, and if you have a use case that's better suited for you, like if maybe your company's an Azure shop and you have more advancement opportunities because you learn Azure, then do that, man. Just dive in, then you can move around your own environment, things like that. And then that multi-cloud approach just kind of makes more and more sense the more that you deal with the cloud after that, right?
Yep. 100%. You find a lot of traditional server techs from like Microsoft houses, they're running Windows Server for everything. The gap needed to make the jump to Azure is a bit narrower than perhaps the gap is to move to something like AWS. You'll find a lot of the old Windows Server techs might make the jump to Azure. And a lot of what I find, and this is a sweeping generalization, so I apologize in advance, but a lot of the Linux techs and hardcore network people like yourselves tend to make that jump to AWS. Someone once told me that AWS networking was networking for grown-ups, and Azure networking was networking for children and toddlers. So I think they were being a bit harsh, to be fair. But I mean,
yeah, no, that's really good. Because especially on the networking side, I find that most CSPs I find from a service side, meaning like the service like Kinesis or Azure Bicep versus CloudFormation or something like this, like those ones are almost like one for one. And what you say is actually true, right? Once you learn just that the names are different, like, and the cloud mindset, or like the way things are done in the cloud, the why cloud of it. I do agree there's a lot of transference between all of the clouds that are out there, but then you run into these fun little ones where like the AWS networking versus like Azure networking versus GCP. Oh God, don't even start on GCP networking, right? Those are like almost like holy war type of fundamental differences between those. So that's where I start to, and I guess it really does depend, right? Where you're coming from, where you're going to, and what part of it you're focusing on as well. Like I find the networking is very different between all three clouds.
Yeah, it is for sure. I think also, I don't know, at least, and maybe this is just anecdotal, but to me, it seems like a lot of the people who are really knowledgeable in networking moved to the AWS, like work for AWS. I don't know a whole lot of people that were network architects that went on to work on Azure networking. And maybe that's just because I don't know enough people, but to me, it just seems like maybe that's the case.
And I actually like Azure networking. I should get that out front, right? I actually enjoy like especially things like there are things that Azure has done that make a lot of sense to network architecture. Like, for example, I actually love the Azure route server, like the route reflector. Awesome. I love it, right? Yeah, I mean, like it makes perfect sense. That's a great, and then, so, I mean, things like, there are other things that I'm just like, why did they do it this way? Or like, did not realize it was going to screw everybody up. Like things like direct server return and things like that. So, But I mean, I don't know though. I don't agree with the whole Azure networking is for children. I mean, maybe it was being facetious, right?
100% was being facetious, but he got the point across, you know. And root server or route server. Sorry, I'm talking to some Americans, so I should say it correctly, right? Route server is a fantastic piece of kit, and you know, if Azure, if anybody is watching, can make their native Azure firewall talk BGP, then that would make network engineers' lives a lot easier, and then you wouldn't have to use Palo Alto or Checkpoint or name your firewall appliance. But I mean, that makes your life so much easier because it integrates with the fabric in terms of your express route connections, your VPN connections, and you know, you're linking it up to your firewall, so you're not having to program manual routes everywhere. It's just fantastic resource.
Yeah, and before the show, we were talking about how I think we all agree that like hybrid cloud is here to stay, right? Like the idea of taking something outside the cloud, connecting it to the cloud, that's not going anywhere. Pick your cloud, that's not going anywhere. And so things like BGP, things like, you know, being able to integrate anything that makes it easier to integrate a third party extra cloud with cloud is like is really helpful. Is great.
And yeah, in terms of dynamic routing protocols, BGP tends to be where it's at. There isn't really any other choice in Azure. If you want to use the Azure tech, it's BGP. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the networking stack on AWS to know if they use anything else, but it's all BGP.
It's the same.
Yeah, all the way down. Pick your cloud. It's all BGP all the way down, right?
Thank God. That's what we're doing. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No doubt. So I would love to ask about, because none of us, again, because we want to get more Azure in here, but we also want to understand, because none of us, when we first had been talking to you, none of us understood the MVP program. Like I'm an AWS community builder, so I assume it's something somewhat similar, right? But tell us about the MVP program, because honestly, outside of yourself, I hadn't heard a lot about it before then.
So yeah, I'm an Azure MVP. There's about 3,000 MVPs in total. Well, maybe a bit more than 3,000 in total across the globe. And that's split across multiple like specialisms almost. So I'm Azure. There's like business applications, things like Business Central and Dynamics and things like that. Then there's specialist areas like Office 365 and DevOps and stuff like that. So there are multiple sort of specialisms. And it's awarded yearly by Microsoft for community contribution, sort of tech leadership sort of stuff like mentoring and community leadership stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, for me, it wasn't ever really about the award, because if it was about the award, you'd get it and then you'd stop. It's about just making the journey for people coming after me easier. You know, I was always, and one of the folks from the networking community who now I think he works for AWS, a guy called Duan Lightfoot. He was he was one of the folks back when I was focused solely on networking and IT ops, was inspired me just to get involved in the community and start to give back more than I had been. You know, so you know, it's just about giving back and helping people for me, and the MVP award for things like that is a nice bonus, you know.
Yeah. It'd be hard to find someone that doesn't know who Duan is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Duan. I think we all know Duan, and I mean, Duan was one of the people that wrote one of the forewords for my book. We know each other very well, so I'm glad. I'm happy to hear his name come out of your mouth, because he's a good guy.
Awesome guy. I guess he's working for the enemy. I mean, AWS now, but I mean, it's
there's I mean, at our level, I truly don't believe there's such a thing as an enemy, because we
100% not. I think, you know, if familiar with Kelsey Hightower.
Familiar. I don't know him personally, but I'm familiar.
So he was, I follow him on Twitter, or I refuse to call it X, but you get the idea. You know, he said so he was working for Google, right? So he said he had said to someone at Microsoft, they're like different company, same team, sort of, and that's how I view all of the community involvement. We may all work for different companies, we may even work for competitors, but we're all on the same team. As cheesy and as corny as that perhaps sounds, but same team. We're still trying to advance tech, and we're still trying to make people's lives easier, right?
Absolutely. I think we were talking about this. I don't remember where we were talking about this the other day, but just this concept that like, as much as we buy into the multi-cloud, way of life here, that means that these teams that are managing your cloud environment should not be siloed into a single cloud, right? They should be, multi-cloud engineers and multi-cloud architects and things like that, right? Because you need to see it as one big, synonymous thing. Yeah. Obviously, the constructs and how things interoperate together are different, but it should be a sole, platform engineering type thing that's covering all of your cloud environments, right?
Yeah, and if you're running platform engineering teams, they're going to be cross functional anyway. So they're going to be cross functional between dev and ops, DevOps. So why not make them cross functional against different cloud providers as well? Yeah, if your company's that big.
I'm glad you both said the platform teams or platform engineering, because that's exactly what I always try to preach about. But it's not like there's not like a multi-cloud community builder program, right? So everybody's going to have their own cloud, like Tim is saying, their own cloud that they're specialists in, and that's probably I don't know many people that are probably an Azure MVP and an AWS community builder and whatever Google's might have, right? So.
I think I'm sure OCI can come up with something pretty soon.
Right.
Yeah, OCI, Alibaba, like just something. But the industry though is very small. Like we talk about, we're on the same team. I don't think it's cheesy and corny because the industry is so much smaller than all of us think it is. We all know each other. It's not even 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon, right? It's like 3 at the most.
So, yeah, it's remarkable. And the rise of, I'm going to sound like an old man here, but the rise of social media and how people interact and how people build their networks. The people version, not the blinky lights version, but how people build their networks on social media, on Twitter, X, and things like LinkedIn. I mean, that's how I got my last several jobs was because of the networking the people networking I'd done, helping people out, getting involved in conversations, and
it's really important to get involved with the community, and we preach that ourselves. We all get involved with the community. If nothing else, it helps you network. This I've often said, especially when I worked at Cisco, but even before that, even after that, I still say that the networking community or the networking industry is a lot more networking than it is like networking, meaning like people networking is very important.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. It is for sure.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what you do with Azure. So like obviously a solutions architect, in theory, you do like a little bit of everything, but like walk us through a little bit of, do you have a focus or do you just kind of like, pick and choose?
So I have a favorite technology or a set of technologies. Yes. So I'm, as we were talking before the show, I'm originally from an IT ops background. So a lot of hands-on server tech and a lot of hands-on Dell networking sort of kit, So, I mean, that's the sort of background I'm from. But that gives you a good foundation for working in the cloud, regardless of who it is, But for me, it was that good foundation for working in Azure. So I'm fairly generalist across most of Azure, so I can put my hand on most of it, and I'm fairly good at reading the docs if I don't know it, Cloud networking for me, and then more recently, managed Kubernetes and Kubernetes cloud native sort of tech is what I call my happy space. But my day-to-day at the minute is working with, as we were talking earlier, working with a big energy supplier provider company that spans a few locations around the globe, and I'm embedded with them as a cloud architect, and my day-to-day is fairly different each day, but at the minute we're working towards a migration of several thousand servers out of private data centers into Azure. So some of that's going to be lift and shift, some of that's going to be refactoring and re-architecting into new technologies. So, I mean, most days are different, or most weeks are different to the last, which is why I enjoy working in the cloud. It's, it's not, you don't get bored very easily.
Yeah, that's something I commented on. I think one of our earlier episodes is like when I first came over here to the cloud space is I realize how fast these projects move, and how quick you have to be on your feet, because it's, you're not waiting for procurement cycles for, kit and things like that, right? Things move so much quicker, but these are crown jewels applications as well. And so it's kind of like this strange new dynamic that I was not accustomed to whatsoever.
And it's funny you say that about procurement times and lead times. I was shocked to hear that my client is ordering some new special switches from Cisco, and the lead time on them is several months. And I was like, what? So we have to adjust
several months. That
Things have gotten
that
better.
sounds good. Yeah. This was way worse.
So they're using those for their express route and their MACsec for the connection or the port encryption and stuff. So, but because I've been working cloud focused or cloud only pretty much the last few years, it took me a moment to get my head around. Hang on a minute, what? Several months? I was like, fair enough, I suppose.
It was years at one point, not so very long ago. It was a year or more, like, lead time on a lot of that kit.
Yeah, I was seeing like 70 weeks at one point.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's the chip shortages and the silicon shortages that, COVID kind of exacerbated, right? I think it is starting to get better now. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to think about that in the cloud. But I mean, in one of our previous episodes, we were just talking about this, like the CSPs have to be feeling the pain of those sort of shortages as well, So far, they've hidden it well, I think, just buying whatever white boxes or who knows what they're doing, right? But
yeah, not only talking about provisioning time, or not provisioning time, but like procurement times, provisioning time is down, because I mean, everybody expects you to just build the infrastructure with some infrastructure as code, use Terraform or something, or whatever the cloud native one is, and they just expect it up just as fast as well.
Yeah, all those IAC constructs already being there for you make it, that much easier to adopt, right? So yeah.
Yeah. What are our favorite infrastructure as code? Are we all Terraform, or are we starting another holy war? Yeah.
I was going to ask you the same, actually. That's funny. But yeah, we're all Terraform guys here.
So, I mean, being an Azure guy primarily, of late, I was ARM templates, which are, I'm sorry, Microsoft, but they're terrible. I'm more recently Bicep, which is like similar to in fact, it's super similar to Terraform. It's scary. So, starting my new job now at Avanade, I I'd played with Terraform bits and pieces, but hadn't really got involved. But I mean, and that's what we were saying earlier about knowing one tech helping you with the on-ramp to another.
Right.
My on-ramp in the first 6 months to learning Terraform, I would say now my Terraform skill set is either as terrible or as good as as my Bicep, so Terraform's fantastic language. There are some annoyances with it, but I mean,
yeah,
same with everything, right?
That's true. And you can take Terraform between clouds. That's the big one, is that you can use Terraform with other providers and all of that. That's the big one, I think.
Once you've learned the logic and the if and the loops and all of that good stuff, I mean, it's just about the provider that you're using and the resource definition.
Modules and resources. Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
One thing that's really funny is if you look at the differences among the providers, though, it's like, I remember when I first looked at how to build an EC2 instance versus how to build a compute instance in Azure, the example code that they'll give you in Terraform, it's like, you're like, what the fuck? Like the Azure one is like 60, 70 lines of code, and the AWS one is like 10. And you're just like, oh my gosh. But you understand what the need for all of it. It actually is good to have that much, versatility and modularity built into the Azure one, but it's like pretty daunting at first.
Yeah, most of that needs to be optional. How the code should be, of course, is that give us the minimum required, right? That had the required things we have to include, right? And then just give us 50 optional ones to add on, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, some places you don't even have an option, right? Like I was saying earlier, I do a lot of hybrid cloud stuff, so I can't just pick one. I basically have to use Terraform because a lot of times it works for the on-prem stuff too.
Yep.
The providers for actual hardware, oh my god, or even just virtual, like even VMware stuff, man, it's really all over the place. Most of them are really bad.
Yeah, we've been working with the ACI one a lot. I'll just leave it at that.
I mean, A for effort, I guess, for trying. But yeah, there's
it's
been
better
a
than
lot.
not having one. I mean, at least I have something out.
But I agree with the IAC. The whole point of it, right, is to speed up agility, but also to support elasticity, which is the big thing about the cloud is being able to do elasticity. So being able to build something, use it, destroy it, whatever. That's the big bonus.
Yeah, and funny, I was having this conversation with our client today. I mean, the whole benefit of using something like Terraform, especially for big enterprises, is to make sure that virtual machine 1 is configured in exactly the same way as virtual machine 101.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be building as an architect or consultant or an engineer, you want to be building your IAC modules in an opinionated way. So if there are non-negotiables like lack of public IP address or specific configurations on your resource, make an opinionated module, and then, like we were saying, make the stuff optional that you don't care about or that can be tweaked without creating massive security holes. But that's the whole point of infrastructure as code, is just to make consistency and standardization an awful lot easier, especially if you're working at enterprise grade, because you're not deploying one or two of these things, and ultimately your infrastructure as code acts as your last line of defense when it comes to like disaster recovery and business continuity, because you're not going to ask Tim, who deployed 10 virtual machines 6 years ago, to come and deploy them in exactly the same way. And, so that the infrastructure as code is your source of truth. Then you're ensuring that consistency and standardization and your last line of defense before, you're after a resume generating event,
Yeah, it's also not only that. I mean, do you do a lot of work with IDPs, and those are internal developer platforms?
Of late, not really.
I only bring it up because so basically an IDP, if anyone doesn't know it, it's like an interface where someone can go and basically grab runbooks, right? Like if a dev needs to spin up an environment, the infrastructure team or platform engineering team usually will already have kind of everything built out, and it's like a self-service portal.
Yeah.
So the point is, like, you want that predefined infrastructure so someone can just go in and take that and build it out for whatever environment they're trying to set up.
So we're starting to do that sort of thing with this current client that I'm working with. We're starting to build out like sandbox environments, which has predefined sets of code that they can go and deploy. The one I've just finished was what I dubbed an AKS playground, but was renamed a sandbox. But, it's effectively the same thing. It deploys a playground, if you like, a set of infrastructure, container registry, networks, monitoring, and Kubernetes cluster, just so that devs can then go and play with it, effectively learn it and see how it all fits together. So doing that, having that sort of thing inside your business, the IDP or internal developer platforms, it allows your developers and your architects to go and play and learn and, and imagine what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a lot of freedom. And Backstage is if anyone's heard of the term, anyone talking about Backstage, that's probably like the most common one right now. I think it's in C and CF as well. So, yeah.
I mean, that's the agility, use case, if you will, is to give the developer everything they need to just start mucking stuff up and building and sandboxing and all of that. When I worked at Cisco, on the vendor side, when I worked at Cisco, we had dCloud, which is the demo cloud. It's very similar. It doesn't use like Terraform or anything. It's all built on other stuff because it's been around for years and years now. So it was built on, but it was the same idea, right? Yeah. On the vendor side, it was more about being able to have repeatable architecture for demonstration purposes, for customers to play with and to be able to show customers the different stuff. But it's the same idea. Take it from a network perspective versus the developer using it as a platform to go build or learn. So, but it's huge. It's a big deal, and it's really, really useful.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of speed and agility, developers and businesses in general aren't going to wait 6 weeks for you to build up an environment for them. I mean, it might be an exaggeration, it might not, depending on the business, but they're not going to wait longer than a couple of hours for you to get them an environment to test their theories and to test their ideas in. Realistically, to be successful, you've got to learn this stuff. You've got to know how to decrease the time to build stuff or the time to create stuff in the cloud, so that your developers can get a running start at it. They're not, while the idea is fresh and exciting in their mind, so they can get a running start at developing it and seeing what fits together and what doesn't,
And prototyping and just like doing that basic smoke testing.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I think that actually is the software development word for it, is prototyping.
Yeah.
But yeah. When I did my bachelor's, there was like a whole class about software development, and I had to learn all the little tech, the words for it, for stuff. And it's like, what is he talking about? Oh yeah, prototyping. Yeah. So no, but that's it. That was the value prop of the cloud to begin with, right? That's why AWS, it started the whole thing. Was here's some extra compute. You could be up and running in seconds. That was the value prop to begin with.
And while we're talking about that, you leveraging the cloud, if that terrible, the Phoenix project, nobody can see that perhaps.
Yeah, man, there it is. There you go.
Yeah,
that's what they end up doing in that book, is they end up leveraging, so that it sounds like they're running big batch jobs on old compute, old hardware, and it was just falling over. So what they then did was leverage the cloud to scale up and to hundreds of nodes or whatever it was, and then scale back down again. So they exactly what we're talking about. They're leveraging the cloud to accomplish things at speed.
And elastically, which again was one of the huge value props of the cloud to begin with, was you don't have to overbuild your data center to support the biggest amount of work you're going to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, you find that, I say this to customers all the time as an architect, you find that so much hardware on premises and in private cloud and data centers is so much overspec, like you were saying, Tim, just for the possibility that you might need to scale into it, But in reality, when you're running your reports and when you're getting your trains, maybe they're only using 25% of that. So all of that CPU and not much above 70% of the memory or something, So, you're paying for what might happen in the on-premises world. And the cloud, that allows that elasticity, like you said, and you're paying for what you use. It scales up and down so fast that there's no point having it sitting there twiddling its thumbs and not doing anything. And it's just costing you money. So cool tech.
Yeah, I worked at a company that their whole model basically was that they would send you something. Like you would go to the website and order stuff for a box that they'd put together and send to you. But if you didn't do it, you were committed. So what they would do is they'd send a backup order. It was like every month they had like a backup order thing where if you didn't order anything, you were still committed to buy something. So they would just have a generic order they would send you. And so what you would see is that at the end of the month, before it ticked over and people were going to be sent this backup order, people would panic, run to the website to buy, to like actually put the order that they wanted together. And they called it month end. And it was exactly the situation where the entire data center was built to handle essentially, 5 or 6 hours of of that kind of hammering.
Yeah. I worked with a customer several jobs ago at this stage, e-commerce platform in this part of the world. And they, in advance, so they were running on virtual machines. So they were running on virtual machines in Azure, which is a start, right? But because of the way they built their application, they couldn't scale out across multiple instances. So what they were doing was, in advance of the busy times, Christmas, Valentine's Day, anywhere where you have to buy jewelry for
vertical,
they scaled up to a massive VM SKU that cost them so much money, over and above what they will ever need, no matter how busy they are, just so they wouldn't hit that limit.
Right.
So what we did then was we worked with them to say, right, let's make your application a bit more stateless. Let's allow it to scale out across multiple instances. Let's take advantage of the cloud. You're sitting running in the cloud, so let's take advantage of it. So instead of having to manually scale your VM up to something huge, let the platform move it to like app service, I think it was that we moved it to, and let it sort of auto scale based on, right, your CPU starting to creep up, your memory starting to creep up. Okay, let's double our instances here. And
like
again,
the refactor. That's the refactor R to make it so that we can scale it outwards. Otherwise, the whole thing's a monolith that you just keep having to make bigger and bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And the best way to take advantage of, you can take advantage of the cloud with a stateful application, but one of the best ways to take advantage of the cloud and the elasticity and the scalability is to create a stateless application. So, what I mean when I say stateless application, it's that you're not relying on local server storage for caching, for state, or for data storage. So you can afford to lose an instance of an application, and your customer just drops to another one as if nothing's happened. There's no experience change. Because the database is outside the application server, the state, the session state, and the data files and stuff that they're working with are all outside. So you can scale from 1 to 100 perhaps, and the experience is the same. It doesn't matter which one the customer drops on, so long as your back end or your backing services are still there.
That's the loose coupling model, right? That's what it's called.
Yeah.
That's what AWS calls it. AWS calls it the loose coupling model, with this idea of decoupling all of your apps.
Yeah. I make them not rely on each other, introduce things like service bus and stuff, and queuing and messaging technologies in between your services, so that if one fails, the upstream or downstream service doesn't care. It just picks something up from the queue or from the service bus,
And we're dancing around it, but Kubernetes. A lot of the stuff lends itself to Kubernetes. So
yes, it does.
I think you mentioned that you do some work with Kubernetes as well. Is it mainly just? I think you mentioned AKS. Is it mainly just the Azure managed one?
So mostly it's the Azure one. Yeah. Once you're skilled in Kubernetes, it generally doesn't matter where it's running. Because the principles are the same. In the on-premises world, you're perhaps having to manage your etcd database, and you're having to do an awful lot of like cluster management, control plane things that you wouldn't have to do in EKS and AWS or AKS in Azure.
Or GKE,
EKS, and AKS. Yeah.
We don't have enough of these.
Yeah, in the managed versions, they abstract an awful lot. It's not completely responsibility free for the operator, but it takes an awful lot of that worry about managing. Your entire cluster databases in etcd. So you're managing that on premises, making sure that's highly available and making sure that's backed up and that it all works.
That's true.
The managed Kubernetes versions are a no brainer for me, because the platform, whether it be Azure, AWS, or Google, they take a lot of that responsibility, take on a lot of that shared responsibility for that sort of stuff. So,
they let the developers focus on developing for the platform rather than having to deal with the system administration, essentially, of the lifecycle.
And there's still your platform engineering folks and your DevOps folks and your Kubernetes specialists. There's still a lot of ops work to be done, even on managed Kubernetes. You've still got to make sure your scaling's there, and make sure you're tracking your dependencies, and making sure that you're not using out of date APIs and stuff like that. I could go on for an hour or more on things that your IT ops folks will still need to do, even with managed Kubernetes. But it's removing enough of a headache that they can focus on making the platform scale, making it secure, and making it so that, again, that your developers are able to hit the ground running.
Yeah, the irony is the more experienced you are with it, the more you want the managed service instead of doing it yourself.
Hey, what can go wrong then, right?
Right. And you're not responsible for all the things that usually do break.
Yeah, right. Just a quick question I want to ask, since you do have a bit of a networking background as well, and now you've kind of transitioned to working with Kubernetes. Where do you see the role of networking in in the Kubernetes space, with this kind of adoption of CNIs and things like
CNI
that.
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, funny you'd say that. So I've been talking to one of the solution architects at Cilium today. So Cilium there are lots of CNIs out there, right? But Cilium, I've just started to get to grips with it, and it's awesome. In terms
There's
of
only one.
It's just in terms of what it can do, I mean, it's combining your so your CNI and your Calico CNI maybe in AKS before you had to like separate ingress controllers and such like Nginx and maybe Linker to your SDO for something if you're wanting to use service mesh or something like that. But and I'm just learning Cilium, at this point. But Cilium in the networking stack, it seems to do all of those things. It seems to do them really well while giving you a lot of visibility through their Hubble, the metrics gathering and stuff. I mean, network specific metrics gathering, which an awful lot of times you're missing in the cloud, that network engineer specific sort of viewpoint, which Hubble will give you.
That's right.
Network engineers are still very relevant, and knowing how, even in a managed Kubernetes, knowing how your pods will talk to each other, and if you're using an overlay, how they're talking to the nodes and how that then all, the dreaded NAT word comes in, how that all talks to the platform and how that all talks to the internet or other services hosted in the cloud. That network knowledge for anything in the cloud, and Kubernetes specifically, because you asked, Chris, it's still very relevant. And I'm attracted to Kubernetes because I find it fun, which maybe is weird, but because from a network engineer background, but maybe definitely not as experienced as you three, but being able to get involved in the weeds almost of the tech, that's attractive, and getting to know and how it all plumbs together and how it all connects and how they all talk to each other. It's super interesting.
It's fascinating, honestly. Container networking is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's so 2 points. All three of the big three CSPs, right? Google, Azure, AWS, their managed providers all use Cilium. So, and then the second point, someone that everyone should follow if you're interested in this space at all is Nicholas, and I'm probably going to mess up his last name. I think it's Vibert or Vibert, Vibert. He's I think he's the senior technical marketing engineer for Isovalent, which is the parent company for Cilium.
Right.
Man, he puts out demos like daily, and he builds all these courses that are like how to use BGP with a CNI, and it's awesome. He's got so much content out there.
So Cilium, I'm talking to one of the solution architects today. They have a map of the labs that you can do to learn Cilium, and one of them is advanced BGP with Cilium, and then there's ingress and network and eBPF and all of the magic that eBPF enables you to do. And there's loads of labs you can do. I'll drop you the link afterwards if you want to include it in show notes.
We'll put it in show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it allows you to see. So there's the observability with Hubble and stuff like that. Then there's the security and the networking side of things. It takes you through multiple labs, and they're all hands on. And I'm working my way through them at the minute. But it's and they're not paywalled. And that's one of the things about cloud native tech. It's a lot of it's open source, and they're not paywalling a lot of the learning content and stuff. So, I'm working my way through it at the minute, and it really is fairly high quality for being free. So I'll drop that in the show notes. The labs are pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely need to put that in the show notes. We've got a whole list of stuff we need to put in the show notes for this show as well. So I'll have to go back and grab everything, your podcast, and of course, how can we get in touch with you and stuff like that. It all has to, you grab all that stuff and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, if you can see my name down here somewhere, I'm pretty much that handle at Karl_IT nerd for most things I'm involved in. So in some shape or fashion. Although, there's X or Twitter and LinkedIn is pretty much where I focus most of my time, but I haven't made the jump to Threads yet.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I'm just going through the list of stuff that we had still on our list that we haven't asked yet. Have you I did have one last one, I guess, and it might be a really short one actually. So we've been looking at a lot of the stuff that the different CSPs are doing to kind of more abstract networking, not just on the container space, right, but like just in general. Like for example, like AWS has VPC Lattice, for example. That's very very dev focused. I'm not as up to on Azure. So do you know, is Microsoft planning to do, or are they already doing something to kind of more abstract the networking away from the devs?
So is VPC Lattice like a mesh networking, sort of all the VPCs can talk to all the other VPCs? Is that sort of
not
tech, is it?
AWS itself, they themselves would say not really, but I think for purposes of just like, for purposes of understanding the very high level, the idea is, that developers can say these services can talk to each other, and then there can be policy where they can, talk to each other.
I think since you know a little bit about service mesh, think about it as a service mesh, but not just for Kubernetes. It's for like everything. So VPCs and
any resource,
it's everything. And you build your own service networks, and it's got a registry and it's got all that.
Yeah,
policy and stuff. Yeah.
Sounds interesting. On the Azure side of things, I mean, you generally, for most enterprise grade networking, you're running with hub and spoke, or you're running with virtual WAN, which is abstracted hub and spoke anyway, But they do have something that you can do with Network Manager, which I suppose abstracts away some of the skill set needed to manage hub and spoke networks and stuff, or you can tell the Network Manager product what you want, whether that be a full mesh network or whether that be hub and spoke, and it goes and does it, So it probably not advanced as what VPC Lattice sounds like it is without looking at it, but it's that sort of technology that removes the need for, I was about to say removes the need for that skill set, but I don't think you ever truly remove the need for that skill set, right? Because if something goes wrong, you're going to need to understand how a cloud routes packets from A to B.
Yeah, that's fair. One other thing that we kind of hit on a little bit earlier is like hybrid cloud stuff, right? So I think, have you been working with Azure Arc?
Yeah. And
what do you do with that, I guess?
So at the minute, actually, there's a couple of things we're doing at the minute with it. So my client runs a fairly large Linux sort of Red Hat estate, and previously monitored with SCOM, with System Center Operations Manager, or whatever it's called, but SCOM anyway.
The nightmares, yes.
Yeah, familiar.
And it's a bit behind the times in terms of patch level, so it doesn't support the most recent terms, or the most recent Red Hat 8 dot something. So what we're doing is we're replacing that with Azure Monitor. And in order to do that in the on-premises world, we need to onboard the servers into Azure Arc. So we're doing that. We're using Ansible. There's a really short Ansible playbook for onboarding stuff to Azure Arc. And then what we're doing on top of that is once the resources are in Azure Arc, they're treated almost like a virtual machine. You can apply Azure policy to them. You can do guest configuration, and being able to apply Azure policy to them allows me then to target the resource group that they sit in and tell the policy to make sure that the Azure Monitor agent is installed on those on-premises servers, and to make sure that we're collecting a specific set of data for logging and monitoring purposes from those servers as well. So yeah, Azure Arc's a really cool piece of tech, and I'm only scratching the surface of it with the monitoring. We're also looking at because Windows Server 2012 and SQL 2012 and stuff is end of life or coming end of life in October. You're able to do a pay-as-you-go extended security updates as long as you onboard your Windows Server 2012 servers. That's a lot of words, a lot of times saying server. But if you onboard them to Azure Arc, you can activate extended security updates for 3 years and pay for it with your Azure bill. So month to month, sort of pay as you go, instead of having to buy years at a time. So
there's a lot of places that could take advantage of that.
There's a ton of places that need that.
And that's 100% only scratching the surface with Azure Arc, because you can do guest configuration. You can apply all sorts of security policies, and the what Microsoft called the Defender for Cloud can reach into your on-premises environment and monitor that sort of stuff as well. And then you can use that to feed into your SIEM Sentinel if you're you're using Microsoft's SIEM, but you can feed all of that into, so hybrid cloud is, for most enterprises, will be where they sit. Lots of enterprises, maybe most enterprises, will never go full cloud because there'll always be something, there'll always be a workload or an application that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yep, hybrid is the future.
It doesn't make sense. Maybe there are latency requirements, sub-millisecond latency requirements, or, that mean that moving to the cloud where even a couple of milliseconds increase, grinds your application to hell, that doesn't make sense. So there's always going to be...
You got 24/7 workloads that'll never be elastic, that don't belong in the cloud. There's lots of reasons, right?
Yeah, so hybrid is the way.
Yeah, we need to get like a Azure Arc specialist to come on and do a whole episode about it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. When I was studying for AZ 104, I spent a good bit of time. I didn't get to lab it or anything, unfortunately, but it looked really cool. It seemed like the idea was to put these agents on your on-prem gear and essentially bring the cloud operating control model
the management
type of thing to it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking for someone to come on and talk Azure Arc, there's an advocate at Microsoft called Lior Kamrat, and I've probably butchered his name.
I know,
but
Lior. Oh, yes.
He is Mr. Azure Arc.
Cool.
And he also dreamt up and built Arc Playground, or Arc Jumpstart it's called. So if you Google Arc Jumpstart, there's a lot of predefined Bicep or Terraform and stuff
that's cool.
It'll deploy entire environments in Azure as a Hyper-V, and then sort of VMs on top of that Hyper-V virtualization, and it'll pretend to be an on-premise server, so you can play with Azure Arc.
Oh, you can put Arc on them. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and so that does, just so you can play. So there's Arc for server, there's the data platform stuff, and there's the Kubernetes stuff for Arc as well. If you Google Arc Jumpstart, there's just entire workshops worth of information there that you can run yourself and get to grips with.
Very
talk
nice.
about a small world. Lior, I know Lior from the VDM, Virtual Design Master. Like back in a while back, they used to do a lot of VMware stuff that he was super involved in. So that name definitely is very familiar.
So cool. He's definitely the one to be asking about Azure Arc, and he's usually more than happy, in my experience, to talk about Azure Arc on socials and stuff. So
very cool. We'll reach out to him.
Awesome.
I think we're actually just about at time. So I wanted to thank Karl for coming on. We already kind of covered, how do we find you? We'll add a lot of the other stuff to the show notes as well to make sure that other people can find your work and also find your podcasts. Sure. And a lot of the other stuff we got to talk about while we're here today. So this has been Cables to Cloud. If you guys enjoyed what you heard or saw, depending on where you are consuming, please feel free to smash that like button and subscribe. There may or may not be a like button, depending on whether this is YouTube or the podcast.
There's always a proverbial like button.
There's always a proverbial like button, even if that is just a subscribe button. So please feel free to subscribe to us as well. And again, thanks for coming on. This has been awesome, Karl. We'll have to have you back at another time.
It's been awesome. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everybody.
Cheers.
Hi, everyone. It's Tim, and this has been the Cables to Clouds podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe to us in your favorite podcast catcher, as well as subscribe and turn on notifications for our YouTube channel to be notified of all our new episodes. Follow us on socials at Cables2Clouds. You can also visit our website for all the show notes at cables2clouds.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.